We need to restore the protections of Roe as law of the land. We need to elect officials who will do that. This fall, Roe is on the ballot. Personal freedoms are on the ballot. The right to privacy, liberty, equality, they're all on the ballot.
President Biden and Democrats looking to put abortion front and center this November. Some strategists calling it a losing issue for Republicans who are trying to take back the House and the Senate. Well, here to talk about it is House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy. So you've had a few days to digest the news and take a temperature of what's going on. How do you see that?
Well, it's still too early to know, but remember what the Supreme Court did. The Supreme Court didn't outlaw it. What they did was move it back to the states. They looked at the Constitution. I'm one who personally believes every life is precious, and I want to save every opportunity. But what the American public don't understand quite yet is the radical position the Democrats have. Democrats aren't just for abortion. Every single one in Congress voted to have abortion up to the moment of birth. America does not support that. So now what most people would want to have their own opinion, be able to have input in it within each state, and that's what will go forward.
Except for what we just reported in Mississippi now. So like if you have that, the Democrats, as I understand it, like everybody, abortion up until point of birth, and the polls show people
do not support that.
But also are not for outright bans either necessarily, though there are some people that are. And so how does that play into like a really tight race where you're looking at the possibility of flipping back a Biden one seat back to a Republican, and it's really close how it plays?
Well, I don't think this is the only thing the voters are going to have their opinion on. They're going to have a high opinion on inflation, the policies the Democrats have gone, high gas prices, a border that's not secure, crime. Those seem to be the top positions people are having affect them every single day. It's interesting when I hear some of these stars say they want to leave America and go to Europe. Well, if they look at the policies in Europe, they restrict abortion after 13 and 15
Yeah,
weeks.
it was a little
much
jarring
different.
to see
Yes.
the G7 leaders making comments like that. I'm like, but do you not know what your own countries say?
Yeah.
But here's this. So Justice Clarence Thomas, he had a concurring opinion. The other justices did not agree with that. However, this is something that's going to be used against Republicans, you can bet. He said that in future cases, we should reconsider all of this court's substantive due process precedents, including Griswold, Lawrence, and Obergefell. Because any substantive due process decision is demonstrably erroneous, we have a duty to correct the error established in those precedents. So one of the things you've done is try to figure out what candidates can I recruit to try to win back suburban voters, for example. And something like this, if the Democrats decide to use Clarence Thomas's position against candidates like that, how do they respond?
Well, then you read the opinion. Alito said, no, this is only dealing with Roe v. Wade, not with anything else. So I don't think they'll be used in a campaign because it's inoculated from there. But I think what you're really going to find is what's happening across the country. We just have a report today where 1.7 million people have switched parties. And who won on that? By more than 2/3, they went Republican. You just had an election along the border that was the second most Hispanic seat in the nation. 84% Hispanic. Biden just won it a year and a half ago by 13 points. Obama won it by 22. Republicans haven't held the seat in a century. And it wasn't a general election, it was a primary, so it's the hardest time to win it. And Myra Flores just won it. I think when you really have a discussion about the issues, and abortion will be one of them, but I don't think the radical position of Democrats to have abortion up to the place of birth is where America wants to be.
And I'm curious, and I don't think we know yet, but I'll be watching the Latina vote because where that lands in terms especially on abortion. I also want to ask you about this. So we're getting close. You said it's 134 days till the election. Here is a House GOP leadership aide, anonymous aide, saying to Axios that if you look at our history with the Freedom Caucus, they don't back down and don't vote for things. So our margins will be really important. Biden's going to be president no matter what. There are going to be times when we need to pass government funding, NDAA, and so on. Kevin, that's you, going to be in a position of having to cut deals with Biden, and that's not going to go well with some of these people, meaning that a lot of people who that are running have been backed by Trump, and they might not be loyal to you. How do you think about
Look, I think what they're loyal to is the Constitution, and they're loyal to their districts and their people, what they promised. And what are they going to talk about? We're going to roll out what is called the Commitment to America. to make sure America's energy independent, to make sure we end the crime and what's happening in our schools and our streets, to make sure that we have a secure border, to have a Parents' Bill of Rights. That's what Republicans will run on. That's what they promise, and to hold this administration accountable. I think if you promise that, that's how you will govern.
And I guess when you do have to pass a big defense bill, people come together and they figure out how to do that.
Well, we just did the NDA last week, and it was unanimous.
Right.
Only a Democrat said no. So.
Okay, this is the other thing. President Trump is frustrated watching these January 6th hearings. Probably a lot of people are, right? Initially, he thought the decision not to put other Republicans on the committee was a good one by you, but now he says this. In retrospect, McCarthy should have put Republicans on to just have a voice. The Republicans don't have a voice. I think it would have been far better to have Republicans on the panel. Jim Banks and Jim Jordan were great and would have been great to have them. But when Pelosi wrongfully didn't allow them, we should have picked other people. We have a lot of good people in the Republican Party. There's a couple more of these hearings to go. Was that a mistake not to put other people?
No, not at all, because you have to understand, and most people don't read the rules. Remember what happened after January 6th. Republicans proposed having like a 9/11 commission, where minority would have a right to have subpoenas, they'd have a say in witnesses. Nancy Pelosi said no. So then she created this committee. And for 232 years, you've never had a speaker dictate what the minority could put on. So who was she going to approve? Adam Kinzinger as the Republican, or Tom Rice? And Republicans don't have subpoena power. So would anything be different? We wouldn't be allowed in to the hearings. We wouldn't be, to the witnesses when they're investigating. There's no rule that would allow us to even ask questions. Remember what they did on impeachment. They didn't even let Elise ask a question. So it would be exactly the same, but the American public would sit back and think, oh, this is very bipartisan, even though the rules would not allow us to bring any witnesses in or ask questions. And if Pelosi was picking which Republicans were on there, and her first pick was Liz Cheney, who do you think she was going to let on otherwise? Yeah. The right decision was the decision I made. If other people change their opinion, read the rules, and I think they'll come right back to the same position.
Have you talked to President Trump about it?
Yes, I have.
Recently?
Yes.
All good?
Oh, all good,
okay.
Yes.
All right. Thank you, Kevin McCarthy. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brian Kilmeade. I want you to do me a favor. I want you to click to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page. This is the only way that I know for sure that you're not going to miss any great commentary, any great news bites, any great interviews coming your way on Fox. You can get it all here on YouTube. So subscribe right now.